Hello, Marko Kölbl.
Hello,
It's very nice to meet you. Thank you so much for joining me
likewise.
today to talk about music and Afghanistan and everything to do with your work as well.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and it's an honor to be on your platform.
Thank you. So I want to start sort of just with yourself and kind of the beginning of your journey. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and the work that you come from and sort of what sparked your interest in studying music and culture?
Um, I grew up with music as a very integral part of my life. My father is a musician as well, and I started playing the piano quite early. And I spent a, a big time of my life with classical piano. I also studied classical piano here at the University of Music and Performing Arts, Vienna. But I soon realized, also coming from an ethnic minority in Austria, the Croatian minority in Austria, that specific forms of music that are more community related and that are less elitist and do not rely on the divide between performer, artist, and audience so much are actually more interesting to me. And so I discovered the world of ethnomusicology specifically because of um, the way how music becomes valuable for communities. That was actually what kind of triggered my attention to the discipline, and it was also a possibility to reconnect with my own cultural heritage, specifically folk songs from my mother's village. And this specific ethnic minority group here in Austria, whose musical heritage is, well, yeah. I mean, we are trying our best, but it's actually vanishing.
Mhm.
And so from that, I was interested generally in music and marginalized groups, music and minorities, but specifically also music and migration. And when in 2015, the public debate and the media debate in Europe was really, really focused on one specific topic, and that's what they called back then the refugee crisis, which of course wasn't the crisis of refugees, but the crisis of the system, of the European border system, and the racist and classist logics of keeping specific people out of Europe. So when this was, let's say, the talk of the day for a year, especially in summer 2015, we and at the department decided that, of course, we would like to react also in terms of not only research but also activism. And well, that's how we started actually the research with the Afghan community in Vienna. But I have to say it was not a first. Research with refugee communities have been done at our department since the 80s. And so there's a specific discourse that we are building on. And interestingly, um, there's a fun story because we had the university had three flats for guest professors, and in that time, with a lot of refugees arriving in Europe, there was indeed actually need of space, of living space, and our rector decided to just give these rooms and in to refugees, and we had a collaboration with a refugee NGO, and so 14 young people moved into these flats, but then the authorities said it's not possible that these people live there if the university is not benefiting from it. So that was actually the initial reason why we had to come up with the research project to say, well, they actually need to live on campus so that we can have these constant discussions with them. But yeah, that was actually the reason, but we did it as well. So we went there every week, and these young people, not only Afghans back then, were also interested in, getting to know us. They were living on campus, so they were surrounded by music. They also wanted to know what's going on. And since that, these people were predominantly Afghans, we soon started to go to certain events, concerts, cultural events, and we realized that the Afghan cultural scene in back in 2015 was really something that was emerging in that time, because around 2005 there were, like, I would say, 5,000 Afghans. No, it was not a considerable community, but in 2015 it became the biggest Asian community of Austria, and it's a disproportionately high number, and so that had brilliant effects on the Afghan cultural scene and specifically the musical scene. And that's when it all became a broader and, let's say, long-term project, because then I was actually with the friends that I made in this time, we were actually interested in how this cultural community musical life is going to develop, and what are the specific conditions of Afghan music in European exile. And that was already 10 years ago. And since then, it has grown into a very beautiful project with a lot of wonderful people that I've met on the way, and it's continuing to grow.
Mhm. You've talked about this before in interviews where you said the cultural, um, it was changing. You could tell that Afghans were kind of keeping really close to their culture, but adapting to European styles and sounds and music. You also touched on something that was interesting, saying there was an Afghan club scene now in Europe. But what does an Afghan club scene look like and sound like?
Well, given that club culture is quite important in most of European bigger cities, a lot of young Afghans soon realized that um, they're kind of kept out of that. There has also been some media reports throughout Europe, actually, in various cities, that the bouncers of the clubs are actually told by the owners of the clubs to make sure that Afghans don't get in, and that's sadly related to the bad image that a lot of that Afghans have in a lot of European countries. And so this, that's of course a racist form of curating one's own club culture events. But this specific political situation made it necessary for Afghan clubs or Afghan concert happenings to emerge. And so, given that there is a pretty good infrastructure of clubs, let's say, for example, from the Turkish community or for the former Yugoslavian community here in Vienna, these venues could also be used for specifically Afghan clubbings. And so they would maybe invite some artists or DJs, um, and actually establish something that probably was not as widespread in Kabul or in other parts of Afghanistan. So it's something that specifically originated here in the European context, and it's quite interesting. And it's also connected to well, there are a lot of topics that are connecting to that, but one that I found quite interesting is specific gender conceptions that might also change, because club culture in Europe is, of course, not gender restricted, but given the gender segregation in Afghan cultural contexts, specifically music-related contexts, um, we could see that there were some adaptations made here in, let's say, for example, in Vienna, and well, specific forms of mixed gendered clubbing emerged with a specifically Afghan note.
Mhm. And so while you were sort of hanging around Afghans, learning a bit about their culture and their background, what What did you discover about the music that was particularly maybe different than your background and your academic experience? What was it? Was it the sound? Was it sort of the way that music is tied into culture? Was it the language?
I mean, I have to admit that when I started, in the flats that I mentioned earlier, when we started our interviews, both me and my colleague Ursula Hemetek, we were quite unknowledgeable. We departed from a standpoint. Okay, we tried to read, John Bailey's work and to listen to specific recordings and so on, but it was really, let's say, the fieldwork process over years that made me, for example, learn a lot about Afghan musical traditions. So when you're asking about the differences, of course, when it comes to folk music and when it comes to classical music, and I think these distinctions that we are making, that I, for example, would make in my own life, I studied classical music, but I'm very much active in folk music now. They also make sense in an Afghan context with Hindustani classical music as, let's say, the classical form that is most widespread, and specific various actually folk music traditions, Musiki Mahali traditions of the ethno-linguistic groups. Um, but of course, it's a different musical idiom, and it's a different geopolitical history and situatedness, and that's also the beautiful thing of ethnomusicology. These differences are actually the very point of departure for ethnomusicological research. And so when we are talking specifically about musical idioms, this was, of course, fascinating to just get to know for me, back in that time, a totally new musical world with various nuances. Because here in Europe, I was really very much interested, and that's because of the young people that I was, working with, and their perception. Afghan pop music was kind of the center of their attention. Of course, historical important figures, starting with Ahmad Zahir, but also other historical, figures, but very much also so contemporary pop music productions that are actually happening. I mean, right now, exclusively happening, but also before Taliban, already mainly happening in the diaspora. And I think, whereas a classical, maybe even conservative ethnomusicological point of view always focused on Hindustani classical music and the folk music traditions, we need to take into account also the relevance and importance and significance of pop music, Afghan pop music, for younger generations, and the specific power of Afghan pop in a diasporic setting.
Mhm. I'm interested in how music still stays with people even after they've sort of grown up or moved on or geographically moved from sort of the center or the hub where that music originated from. How important is music in the lives of people who sort of left that environment?
I mean, my first impulsive answer would be extremely important. And that's not a specific phenomenon related to the Afghan diaspora. That's something we see in minority studies, in diaspora studies, in music and migration studies, and it's a pretty much uncontested, so to say, claim that the relevance of music that has some kind of ethnic or cultural connection to feelings of belonging gain relevance in diasporic or marginalized settings, simply because um, simply because the consumption, you don't even have to be a musician, the consumption of music or being able to dance to it, being able to sing along, is a very low threshold way of engaging with one's own feelings of belonging, of cultural belonging, that no one can take from you. Even though, of course, I mean, we will talk about that probably, you know, even though if, you know, regimes try to ban music, as Lorraine Sakata put it in the title of her book, music in the mind is something that no one can take from you. And in diasporic settings, it's also something that you can that you always have access to, and that you don't need to explain to anyone. You know, there would be other cultural expressions that are not that easily doable. But another, I think, quite important aspect is that the quality of music itself and the quality of dancing itself is a very bodily experience. It's music that the response that our body and brain has to music is very affected, very much in the realm of affect. And it's tied to emotions. It's tied um, to something I would simply maybe call the non-rational, and that also is probably a very important aspect when we talk about the effectiveness of music in diasporic settings or in settings of marginalization and feelings of belonging.
Yeah, the feeling around music is something that I've come to understand is really important, even though it's not tangible. Like you can't give it. You just have to feel it. And that's interesting because uh, in the context of the Taliban's ban on music, it's so psychological. I don't even think I have the words to really explain it, but I'm trying to sort of find an answer to it. But the Taliban's justification for banning music is still not really clear to me personally. Um, Afghanistan is not the only Muslim country in the world. This isn't the first time they've banned music. Why do you think that the Taliban has banned music? What is the justification for it? What's the point of it?
I personally think, and I'm just right now writing an article about that with my students Mirwais Hakimi and Emran Mahmoud. I think, um, and I will come to other reasons as well, but I think one reason would be something that I would term, and that's maybe a theoretical take now, um, terrorist exceptionalism. The Taliban um, ban music because it helps them creating an image of themselves um, that consolidates their position as against the progressive and against the modern within the country, but also internationally. So if the music ban, which is considered to be a very drastic step internationally, and I mean also in the context of cultural rights and human rights and artistic freedom, this is something that most representatives of, let's say, the diplomatic world will actually not understand and not tolerate. But in this specific context, it helps the Taliban to create this specific image of a radical regime. And I would also argue that we can draw parallels to the gender apartheid happening in Afghanistan, because also that is something that often also people like you said just now, it's not this, the reasoning is not really clear. Of course, there are yes, there are explanations and also religiously and morally explained arguments, but still, and even within the Taliban, there are a lot of people, are arguing nowadays that the total ban of education for women, for example, is too much. But we see that obviously also these kind of measurements help creating this specific image, and it's a way also of consolidating power. Of course, there are other aspects as well, you know, that has been said quite often. Music is a way of expressing not only emotions and feelings and, cultural belonging, but also a way of resistance, of resilience. It might even, on the lyrical level, be a means of direct counteraction and so on. So that might be another reason. And I would also argue that we cannot forget that some kind of, I would say, cultural skepticism towards music, especially in the Pashtun context, existed or is existing also regardless the Taliban. So I've seen that clearly in my research, in my field research in Pakistan, in the Pashtun context. And it was also interesting to me to, from a non-judgmental point of view, try to understand these different conceptions of music. And also to understand, I mean, not to, of course, not to understand it in the sense of, um, you know, attaching some kind of understanding that would also legitimate it. That's not what I'm saying, but just from a research point of view, also trying to take a step back from a kind of Eurocentric understanding of the music ban and to maybe just be able to understand culturally where it comes from. So even though, of course, taking it on a state level and imposing it as a law is something else. But we can also see that there is not one specific law that would be the music ban. Taliban has issued various regional decrees in various different contexts, be it music in taxi, in cabs and taxis, or be it music in the wedding halls or whatever. So there are specific regional decrees. There is actually not one kind of very straightforward kind of law strategy attached to it. But yeah, so these would be probably kind of the manifold points that I would kind of like to draw together in order to be able to understand what that actually means. The
Mhm.
sad thing is that the effects of it are so wide reaching.
Yeah, and that one of the effects is that a lot of musicians had to leave, like evacuate Afghanistan for the sake of their family safety. But you've spent time in Pakistan most recently doing some field work. Can you talk a little bit about the living conditions of Afghan musicians in Pakistan? Sort of how, in the past close to 5 years now, how are they able to practice music? Are they connected to music? Is it something that sort of they don't want to even acknowledge anymore because of the situation that they're in? What can you tell me about where they're at?
Mm. Um, while during the first Taliban regime, Pakistan was something like a safe haven, especially Peshawar, for Afghan music practice, and John Bailey has written extensively about it. Um, Now, in the second Taliban regime, things look different, unfortunately. In the beginning, in 2021, Pakistan, and I think we have to acknowledge that. I mean, there were 3 million Afghan refugees in Pakistan, and there was UN and UNHCR presence, and there was also a political commitment, a kind of responsibility felt for Afghan refugees. Um, and in the beginning, I've talked to a lot of musicians in Islamabad and in Peshawar. There were also structures that would make it possible for musicians to teach, to perform, and so on. But this has changed within the next 2, 3 years. UNHCR presence diminished, and now we have come to a point where the situation is just terrible and horrendous. I will start with Peshawar, which is like a very important center for Afghan musical practice, especially the hereditary musicians from Kucha Karabat. These kind of traditions are actually really, they have really been just relocated and practiced further. But when I was there 2 months ago, for several months, for 2 months, the situation was not good. Musicians of all the generations were sensing the problems and the danger that's lurking, but they would still have possibilities to teach, some possibilities to perform, but less than the years before. Now, I mean, uh, right now, end of July 2026, um, obviously the Pakistan government, there is a specific police force, a police unit that is targeting Afghan nationals specifically in order to detain them in detention centers and deport them. So while they were not that active in the Peshawar region, now they are. And all my musician friends from Peshawar are contacting me and others in despair. This situation has been reality in Islamabad already before. Some of the people I've talked to in Islamabad would not be able to leave their houses or the places they are hiding. Most of the musicians have left Islamabad before that, simply because the radical deportation policy that the Pakistani government decided to take action on, which actually started end of 2023, but was really enforced in 2025 and now. And it's just sad because we have to ask ourselves, there have been some programs like the evacuation program of the German government, which is terminated. So there is not a single state in the world that feels responsible, and deporting musicians to Afghanistan. I mean, it actually shouldn't be a question what that means. And so, in this very specific, crucial moment, and me and my friends from the Afghan cassette archive, Omid and Saad, we are trying to now just get into action, just find ways of reacting to this political situation, maybe building up political pressure, finding ways of, I mean, even though that's so hard right now in the European context, but maybe just not stopping of trying to find ways of relocation and so on. So to answer your question short, the situation of Afghan musicians right now in Pakistan is devastating. Already when I was there, it wasn't good. People would share with me that it's really getting on their psyche and it's really hard for them in so many different levels, economically, psychologically, artistically. Also the children, I mean, most of these wonderful, hereditary music families, the children are so extremely good. But where can they have their out? I mean, they will find their ways, social media, and they are full of energy. But still, there needs to be some kind of structural support right now. Otherwise, we're not only speaking of individuals. I mean, individuals are at the core human beings, but we are also speaking about a whole world of a musical tradition that is at stake, and we have to say that drastically because we need to gain attention to the matter.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that I've learned in the past year with speaking with people about music is that there really is sort of maybe a hesitation or a lack of education to name it what it is, which is it seems like there's no place where an Afghan musician can live honorably and make a living and have the artistic freedom to really pursue but also advance music. In the
Yeah.
past 5 years, we haven't seen anything come out of Afghanistan, but also it seems like the diaspora is kind of stuck in time where everything sounds the same, everything looks the same. I'm wondering what happens to a musician's mind and sort of their spirit when there really is in this context, literally no place for them. Where are musicians who are talented, capable, ambitious, where are they supposed to go?
Yeah. Um, Maybe to answer on a kind of a positive note to that question, I might share with you an experience that I'm really grateful for, and that I didn't actually expect to turn out that well, um, and that would be a project of establishing an Afghan music education in exile program here at our department. Um, it was just an idea that I had when talking to Dr. Wahid Sagar, the former chair of the music department of Kabul University Fine Arts Faculty. We were talking about the fact that all the teachers have been brought to Germany via the German government and a specific evacuation program, but all the students were just left in Kabul. And so a very naive idea was, well, let's just try to resume this kind of music education here. I mean, I'm working at this department, I'm working in this university. So this is actually the place where I might be able to do some kind of change, where I'm able to influence, the the situation. And indeed, it worked out. So I mean, it was a huge bureaucratic, struggle getting the residence permits and so on. But being able to bring 4 students to our department in 24 and now again 6 students in 2026, and we hopefully might be able to continue it every 2 years. We are actually now growing, or we are kind of seeing that this program grows, and Wahid Sagar is also teaching at our department. So we try to just make this something more sustainable, and students joining this specific program for Afghan music education in exile also shows us, and now maybe to answer to your question, that indeed, maybe not on a large scale, but still there are ways of kind of trying to establish these spaces that we are talking about, establish um, room, space where musicians can go to. And I think specifically in the educational context, that's quite important, because most of these musicians, they did their BA at Kabul University Music Department, and then the music department was forcibly closed. And so what now? So it's not only a music ban, it's also an education ban that we are seeing then. And so here, some action was successful, and that's something beautiful. I mean, I'm quite. I would say it's quite important to also frame this in a specific way. There is a lot of, there is a certain coloniality at hand. If we are talking about the educational transfer from the global south to the global north, there might be aspects of white saviorism, informing the structures of what's happening. And of course, also the educational system here is different. There are specific theoretical discourses around that most of our Afghan students, do not really know from their previous Afghan education. So different epistemology is happening, but that's also beautiful. I mean, that's also, of course, there are differences between Kabul and Vienna, and that's what we are also, that helps us grow. I mean, both sides. Yeah.
Mhm.
But that's just, that's a small scale project that we try to expand, but it's a small scale project. And the broader structural question, I mean, this pertains to thousands of musicians, and, not like 8 people that might now be happy to be studying in Vienna. So it's a broader question, and it needs broader political answers. And I would also like to right now try to, I mean, of course, there are NGOs, international NGOs, UN cultural rights department. I mean, these NGOs, they were, you know, um, talking about these issues for a long time already. But probably what's necessary is also that everyone working in this field and everyone involved in Afghan music studies, Afghan music practice in exile, the network also needs to be better. And I think what you are doing with the platform is also a step into this direction, because just you know, hearing and being able to watch others who work in the same field is also a possibility of connection, but also a possibility to learn. And I think that's one of the crucial steps that we have to make. The networking has to be kind of supported way more than up until now.
Mhm. So, I, we're very close to entering um, the fifth consecutive year of a ban on music. Um, what do you think of this ban? And it doesn't seem like it's going away. It doesn't seem like anyone really cares, to put it very bluntly. What do you think that now that, we sort of discussed the cultural and the historical context and sort of the present day of what this band means? What do you think about the band?
Um, I mean, unlike the last time, when um, the music ban was, of course, invested with instruments, but also with music devices like the cassette. And we all know, the historic image of the cassettes dangling from the trees. Unlike the last time, we now live in a digitized world where the consumption of music does not need specific music listening devices. So banning music in a world of smartphones and in a world of the internet is not as easy. And I would argue that the digital um, the digital readiness of music, so to say, kind of contradicts the very concept of a music ban. I'm not uh, I'm probably not attaching too much, power to that, but still, a complete, silence cannot be reached nowadays. And I've listened, my our students from Kabul and friends from Kabul tell us that, of course, they listen to music, and there are always specific dangerous situations like listening to music in cars, and then there's a Taliban checkpoint, and then maybe you're not fast enough to just make the sound off, and then suddenly you have a problem. But still, we see that the music ban per se is less effective than during the last Taliban regime. But that doesn't minimize the horrendous negative effects of the music ban to musical practice itself, because what because there are so many um, fields of musical practice that are actually in danger. It's not only uh, being able to perform like for yourself or for others. It's the recording industry. It is the whole field. I'm also, as an ethnomusicologist, concerned about that. The whole field of music research, everything connected to music academia is also on hold. And by the way, we see that a lot of music practice initiatives in the diaspora are happening, but music research is kind of off the table. There are no people are not really thinking about giving resources for music research, and we've seen that during the first and the second Taliban regime, um, let's say music scholarship has taken a specific form and shape, and there was something going on, especially in also the music department of Kabul University. Um, and there's a specific scholarship, of course, Bailey's and Slobin's and Sakata's work is quite important, but there's also a specific scholarship in Dari, in Farsi, in Pashto, that has its own logics. And this is on hold again, because, I mean, if you're, if you happen to be lucky to be able to escape, to go somewhere else, then this will not be your prior concern, writing articles, writing books. So that's another field. And then of course the whole field of music education, the transmission of music, which I think is really crucial, because if the transmission of music, of course, the transmission of music in Afghanistan was to a great extent something non-institutionalized with ustads, the whole system. But we also see that in the last decades, ANIM, the Aga Khan School, the music department, there were institutions of music transmission, and also that is on hold, both the private and the institutional. So there's so much actually, so many fields that are really suffering from this ban, despite, of course, personal people's lives. I mean, a wedding, an Afghan wedding, and that's, I mean, we are speaking of cultural traditions here. It's not, it's not something newly invented or something that's, imported from the West. That it's a musical heritage that goes back so long, and so in this specific regard, I would also talk about the people who are where Taliban are taking something away from them, which is actually an integral part of everyday life and a specific festive situations.
Mhm. I want to end it off on hopefully a good note or a happy note. With everything that you've learned and seen about Afghan music, what gives you hope for the future of Afghan music?
Well, I mean, I can probably just speak from the situation now here in Vienna with the students, now new students joining in the next months. Um, this is something that gives me very much hope. We had similar programs, for example, during the siege of Sarajevo, with Bosnian students entering our university. And if we just have a look, because that was 30 years ago, so we just recently had some kind of commemoration of that. If we have a look what happened to these students, all of them in really important positions, being head of the music academy, cultural ministry, and whatnot, I just hope that the efforts in diaspora will pay back to kind of re-establishing a musical infrastructure in Afghanistan in a time that I certainly envision. Because even though right now, yes, it seems kind of far away, and it seems that the world has forgotten about the problems in Afghanistan, and it seems that there are so many other problems popping up that the Taliban is kind of uncontested, and we also see very sad political developments, like the invitation of Taliban representatives to Brussels. Also, Germany is really not a very good example when it comes to how the question of how they negotiate diplomatically with the Taliban. They are just actually legitimizing their power right now. But still, I'm staying optimistic. This terrorist regime cannot stay forever. And when the time comes, that culture and especially music is going to be reestablished, there will be a lot of positive, hopefully positive impulses coming from all around the world, because we see that there are a lot of centers in the diaspora where exactly this kind of positive envisioning of a future is happening.
I have the same hope. I think that every time I've spoken to someone, um, they've always carried that hope for the future. Music is it's a universal language that I think that we can all stand behind. So thank you for giving me your time today, for your knowledge and your experiences. Um, I hope that we hear about Afghan music in a positive light in the future. But thank
Thank
you
you so
so much
much.
for your
Thank you so much,
time.
Marjan. And thanks for all the work you're doing. It's really
Thank
great.
you. Thank you as well.